the 500 largest companies in the world, the Fortune Global 500, and we looked at where are the women on the boards, where are the women in senior management. This is our 35th report in 29 years. We've been looking at women on the boards of different companies, of different regions, of different industries. And we do it because it creates a baseline data by which to measure whether we have achieved corporate leadership. I call it advocacy through data, which we need to do more. Numbers tell you what's there and what is lacking. And business and government function on the basis of data. It helps us, it helps the institutions we want to affect. So this one, we had been tracking the largest companies in the world since 2004, first looking at the 200 largest as ranked by Fortune on the basis of revenues, okay? This year, we decided to expand it to the 500 largest for the first time to get an even broader look, but we could still see the spectrum. So what did we find? Oh, I have the clicker. Does this thing work? There. So what we found is that globally, among the largest companies in the world, of which I think they're based in 34 countries, 28.9% of board seats are held by women. Now, in 2004, that was only 10.4%. So that represents an almost threefold progress, okay? That's a big deal. But look at this other not the other slide, the other pie chart. These are women in senior management. And look, it's only 21%, okay? This will show you a pattern that we found. There is no correlation between putting more women on boards, resulting in possibly more women in senior management. There is no such correlation. Two different things. And you say, well, why is that? Because it's easier to get talented women from the outside to sit on your board than it is to grow them from the bottom up and develop that expertise. That is an unfortunate fact. So how do we compare regionally? I can't read a blessed thing. And what you will see is that Europe, at 39%, has the best record of any region, and the lowest, as you will see, lies in the Asia-Pacific region. The US and Canada, North America, doing a little bit better at around 34%. Catching up, if you will, because the US was kind of behind Europe for a while, but now it's doing better. So when you get that average, 29.8%, it's because you're dealing with the highest at 39% and the lowest at around 10%. So you say, well, why is there such a discrepancy? Let me tell you, when we started in 2004, the largest companies were based in Europe and the United States. In 2004, they dominated the largest. In 2025, the largest companies, 40% of them were in Asia Pacific, which means that the center of gravity for the global market has shifted eastward, where we still have to develop women's talents in corporate leadership. So what that means is that the Asia Pacific market, as I mentioned yesterday, is one that we should look into in terms of participating, cross-border. It also means that our work in terms of global equality for women in the corporate arena means we need to develop strategies for the Asia-Pacific region. Now, you would think with Europe leading that the number one country, I we compared regions, now we're comparing countries. And guess who came out number one at 50%? Australia. Yeah, she's grinning there because, it's my country. But as you will see, France leads all of Europe, and then European companies come, and look at the bottom where China and Chinese Taipei are. They are developing economies, although some people will say China has developed, but they're developing in terms of that consciousness for raising more women's leadership in those regions. The US, doing better, but clearly nowhere near the top. So those are individual countries. If you want to take a photo, this is your country. This is the slide. Okay. So then, how do individual companies fare? These are the top 10 companies in terms of best performance in the appointments of women to corporate boards. Now, before you look at which companies, oh my God, look at the right. The last column are the percentages of women in these companies. And do you see the bottom one? It says 53 point something percent. That's what it takes to get to the top 10. Can you imagine? All of the companies in the top 10 have female-dominated boards. We never saw that in 2004. Our top 10, you had to be 23 point something percent. Now look where we are, 53.9 just to reach the top 10 list. All right? That is significant progress. Now, number one goes to an Australian company, of course, Woolworths, okay, which is based in Australia. And then you will see Australia has another company there in the top 10, National Australia Bank, and we will have Ann Sherry, who's on that board, speak to you later. You will also see BNP Paribas over there, right? I think at around number 4. And we will have Guylaine Dievre, who is the corporate secretary and who serves on other corporate boards, speak to you later. And the only German company that made it to the top 10 is Bayer. So we have Ertharin Cousin, who will speak to you later. So you see that? Australia, USA, and France. Isn't that amazing? I'm so proud of these women. So that's your top 10. Now, on corporate boards. Why is it that some companies, regions, and countries do better than others? You have heard mention already of the German quota. Well, the quota actually became a popular strategy when Norway in 2003 imposed a quota of 40% of board seats had to be held by women by a certain date, and if a company didn't meet that quota by that date, their whole board will be abolished. They'd have to start from zero. In Italy, which also not only met but surpassed their quota, it was because you were fined as a company if you did not meet the target on the date that was mentioned in the law. So the quotas that work the best are those that have sanctions and deadlines, sanctions for non-compliance. But other countries, we call them soft quotas, don't have that, and they don't work as well. But now you have about 44 countries that have quotas. But look, Japan was the last one, 2022. UAE has it, Bahrain has it, Malaysia has a quota, okay? Panama has a quota. It started in Europe and has spilled over to other countries. So now there is this global strategy that is being used. The EU created a mandate for all 28 member nations that they had to reach a percentage. So when you add the 28 to the 44, you're like in around 70-some countries that now have quotas for women on boards. It works. Quotas work. Companies do not want to break a law. So when it's the law of the land, there's something to be said for these legal mandates because it forces demand on the part of companies. The supply was always there. All of you in this room, those outside of you, outside this room, we have talented women who were board ready. What quotas do is force demand. And so I don't want somebody sneering down, looking at it and saying, oh my God, I don't want to be a quota woman. Oh, get over it. It's a door, and we have to push it open. Use it. You know, why would you not? And what the heck is a quota woman anyway? You have a vote on the board. You can articulate. You are smart. And do you think a company could afford to put a bobo on a board, whether male or female? That annual report is going to have that person listed? Oy, no. So, quotas work, but not every country has a quota that's effective. In Australia, they had a stock exchange strategy in which they put in the corporate governance code that you had to show diversity, the diverse composition of your company. They set targets, they competed with each other, they had something called male champions of change, which were CEOs who volunteered to be sponsors of 1 or 2 women using their own networks to put women on boards. I gave an award to the stock exchange in Sydney because that was an effort that really succeeded. And it came from the private sector. It was not mandated by the government, but it works. And that's what we need, a real strategy. In the US, we don't do mandates. Stock exchange, well, no, actually NASDAQ did put, it's not a mandate. They wanted information you had to file, right? And say, what is your board composition and your plans for making it diverse? And so in this new era, they were sued by conservative lawyers for being discriminatory to have that in place, and they took it back, unfortunately. But there are other strategies. What worked in the US is what I call shareholder pressure. Pension funds, okay, investment funds said, we want to see a woman on the board. When Facebook did an IPO, a question in Wall Street Journal from one of the columnists said, if women are the majority of social media users, why is there not a single woman on your board? And it went viral. Then other writers started writing about it and said, yeah, why is that? That's how Sheryl Sandberg got on the board, but it was an internal person as opposed to an external, independent director. But they have progressed since then. So it's shareholder. The pension funds in the US are huge, okay? These are the pension funds of all kinds of government employees. CalSTRS, teachers, they own millions of some companies' shares. When they say, we will not vote if your board is not diverse, that is shareholder pressure. New York Pension Fund has that, California Pension Fund, Rhode Island Pension Fund, those are huge. And so that has an impact. I'm sharing this with you because there are other strategies that you can employ in your respective countries. If they don't want to do a quota, there are other strategies. The most basic one, put board diversity and specifically gender diversity on boards in your corporate governance code. And you say, what is that? Those are good governance practices, and sometimes they're in stock exchanges, and sometimes they're separate commissions, okay? And better yet, get on those boards. Okay, so moving on, there is a quota for women in senior management that I mentioned previously. The first one to do that, and why do you think that is needed? Because you have to create a pipeline. of women to become board directors and CEOs. And so Germany was the first country in the world to have a quota for women in senior management. If there are 3 senior management, 1 must be at least a woman. No, we should, because that was the first one ever, okay? Then France immediately followed. Oh, we're not going to be superseded by Germany. Well, you know, let me tell you, competition works. So what? So they did it too, but larger numbers of companies, same rule, but it's either gender. No one gender should dominate, okay? And then in Iceland, they have what's called an executive order. It was the prime minister set a target, and he said, by this date, hopefully, we will have. And if you look at the bottom numbers, these strategies, the 2 quotas have worked, the numbers have increased, and they're going nearer the target. So what's important here? You have to have a strategy, okay? And there's something to be said for legal mandates. Now, what are the companies that are doing best in appointing women to senior management? There are 29 companies in the top 10 because of ties. And if Europe dominated the list of best performing in terms of board directors, US companies, you will see that a lot. Here's the second part. US companies tend to develop women senior managers more. So you will see a lot of US companies here. What you will also see is that the majority of companies, and I'm going to go back, have reached parity in senior management. That is rare. You see, over 50% is parity. Okay, this is the first list. That's quite an achievement in senior management. The next list, same thing. Only a few are at 40% near the bottom, right? 40-something percent. That is rare. We did not see that kind of progress before, okay? It takes time, but you know, when you develop a strategy, it works. Next. Women board chairs and women executives, the highest ranks in executive talent, not there. In the Fortune Global 500, the 500 largest companies in the world, 39 were headed by women. It's what, 6-something percent? Board chairs, not many either. So you get on the board, but you're not leading committees. That is a big deal. Chairing a committee. CEOs, clearly the glass ceiling remains. We aren't there. But I want to share with you something really interesting. Those 39 companies headed by women in the 500 largest list had a higher percentage of women on boards and women in senior management than male-led companies. Do you see this? And we had prior studies just looking at where women directors are and senior managers in women-led companies. We've done it twice, and that's the result we found. When women run companies, there's a higher percentage of women on boards, higher percentage than women in management. They're not feminists. They are business people who want their companies to succeed. But maybe because of their own experiences, they're more blind to gender when it comes to talent. So that is a terrific number. So in Germany, which are the ones? These are the top 5 that you will see. Bayer, of course, number 1 there in terms of boards and in terms of women in senior management, Allianz. So these are the 5. In general, the companies in the Fortune 500 that are German averaged around 34%. That's a lot higher than many years past. So what do we have to do? You have to be intentional about creating change. The numbers tick up when there is a strategy, as I mentioned before. It doesn't happen naturally. You know how people say that? Oh, there's so many talented women, they'll rise naturally to the top. It didn't happen. So we have to have actual initiatives. I can't read, that's the second one. Hello? A little help here? Business case. Yes. I said that last night. We have to say it over and over to executives, okay? It is not social justice. The inclusion of women in senior management is good business practice. We have a bibliography of 102 reports that say the same thing. But McKinsey years ago did a study. They interviewed over 2,000 executives. 60% understand the business case, but only 29% acted on it. So, third, you got the message. You have to develop talent. In Australia, there was a company on their 200-year anniversary. They announced that they reached parity in management. It took them 10 years through 2 CEOs to follow through a plan. You know, it required training, it required incentives, it required incentives like pay, it required accounting from every manager as to where they were in that journey, and they did it. So on their 200-year anniversary, and I was there, the CEO at that time announced and said, we are at parity. I mention this because it takes time, but you have to plan for it and do it, okay? The fourth, workplace culture. Oh, our prior CEOs already hinted at that. I mentioned yesterday that we lose in the United States a lot of women engineers. We graduate them, they go to work, and after 2 years, they leave. And in the study that was reported in the New York Times, it was because of a toxic work environment in which they felt they were not supported, not only by supervisors, but by their colleagues, whom they felt worked hard to make sure they are ejected. It is horrible, but it's the microaggressions mentioned earlier, and not being given opportunities to lead projects or be part of projects that are large. And lastly, it matters who leads a company, who leads any institution. Leadership matters. The CEO who actually, as Michael said, walks the talk, makes a big difference. So that's our prescriptions for change, and that's the report. Now, I would like to hear from, let's hear first from Irene and her reaction to the report. Irene Cousin was the former head of the UN World Food Program, and prior to that, she was U.S. Ambassador to the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. So please welcome Irene Cousin.